Hello, welcome to the All Out Politics podcast from Sky News. I'm Adam Bolton, and this week, what else? We're going to talk about Brexit and the chances of Boris Johnson finding his way out of the political cul-de-sac into a pre-Christmas general election. And joining me this week are the trade unionist Eddie Dempsey, the author of Getting By, Estates, Class and Culture in Austerity Britain, Dr. Lisa Mckenzie. She's from Durham University, and our chief political correspondent and master of the political skyscraper, John Craig. Welcome to you all. Well, Lisa, I mean, you're out and about sampling public opinion. What do they make of this latest parliamentary imbroglio over the timetabling of the debate and whether or not there should be a general election?
Well, I was actually on Saturday, I was doing interviews for my research with working class Brexit leavers up in County Durham, not in Durham City, out in the old mining communities. And I'm going to be honest, people have totally had enough. They've really, really had enough. They've had enough of the to-in and the throw-in. They've had enough of the political games. And they're what they want next is far more nuanced than any of the sort of vox pops of, we just want out, we want to leave. What they're talking about now is far more nuanced than that.
What are people talking about?
What they're saying is they are very concerned about the whole of the country. The people I'll be honest, the people that I've been working with up in County Durham and in Nottinghamshire, they are concerned, even though these are Leave voters, they're concerned that they're going to get punished in a couple of years' time. They think that if we don't leave, they'll be punished for voting for Leave, and they think that if we do leave, they've really got these fears that London and the South East will keep food from them. And I know that this probably sounds a bit conspiracy theory, but these are genuine fears of people.
And is there no sense, as you say, if there's a nuanced response, is there no sense amongst the people you're talking to that these are precisely the issues that Parliament's trying to work itself through in a very divided context?
No, they absolutely understand that this process has got to go through. But where they are now is that they don't believe that the middle class that they lead, and actually what they say is the Westminster 1 mile, is serious about leaving. That's what they think. They think that they're never serious about leaving, and actually this is just a constant ruse to not leave.
Yeah, I mean, they'd be right to think that. Since we voted to leave the European Union, there's been shenanigans after shenanigans in Parliament, and it's absolutely obvious that we've got a Remain Parliament that doesn't want us to leave the European Union.
Basically, you're a trade unionist. I mean, isn't that what Parliament is there for, to argue, to negotiate and to reach conclusions?
Yeah, of course, but this has to be done in good faith. So, for example, if you look at... now, I've always been in favour of leaving without a deal, because we've got a Parliament that I believe would not allow the context for negotiations that could lead to a good withdrawal agreement. But that being said, if you look at the objections from the Labour Party to the latest withdrawal agreement negotiated by Boris, their primary reasons, they say, it doesn't offer protections for workers and environmental rights. Now, that was taken out of the withdrawal agreement this time, but it was in May's withdrawal agreement, so they didn't vote for that. So it's clear that despite the rhetoric about protections for workers' rights and environmental protections, the real aim is to stop Brexit happening at all.
But aren't those things important to you as a trade unionist?
Well, absolutely, but they're important to me as a trade unionist because I believe it's through our agency we get workers' rights and protect ourselves. And if you look at the workers' rights we've got in this country, they're often far superior than EU workers' rights and often predate EU workers' rights. So this is a very negative proposal from Labour. I mean, the whole point of having a Labour movement is for us, through our own endeavours, to win workers' rights and see that established in Parliament.
You're nodding there, Lisa.
I am nodding because one of the things that people are saying to me constantly, and I've interviewed so far over the last, and I started these interviews before actually the referendum. so moving up to the referendum. And what people have said to me, and very recently, it's been really, this is what I'm saying, these are nuanced arguments. People are listening to these arguments, they're engaging with them. I was in the pub watching it on the telly on Saturday, actually, with people. And one of the things they said is they sat there, and this is, as Jeremy Corbyn did his speech about trade union rights, I'm sat in a pub in an old mining community in County Durham, and they said to me, you wouldn't think that we were ever on strike, would you? You wouldn't think that we set our own co-ops up, would you? You'd never think that we did anything. And they were absolutely, they were laughing, but they were very serious about their contribution to the country and their contribution to Parliament. Just because they're hundreds of miles away, they know that they have a big contribution to this. And that what they were saying is, where are we in this debate?
Well, this is it. It is frustrating. And it's probably worth paying a bit of attention to the actual withdrawal agreement that's been put up by Boris Johnson at the minute, because you're hearing a lot of talk of people saying this is worse than May's deal.
That's what Mr Corbyn and a lot of the opposition parties claim.
So the opposition are saying it's worse than May's deal. It will give Boris Johnson the opportunity to turn us into a new Singapore, but with rain, out on the coast of Europe. But if you look at the detail of it, it's quite practical, because the question of Northern Ireland, I mean, Britain's claim to sovereignty in Ireland is obviously weak, so weak that it cannot assert its sovereignty in terms of hard border in Ireland. It recognises that. So it's quite a practical step in this regard.
Someone who you wouldn't have a problem with the United Ireland and see it as a step in that direction.
Well, I think the people in Northern Ireland in particular have had a raw deal. I spent Christmas in East Belfast, and if you have a look at the place, the industries are wrecked. I mean, we've just seen a strike in Harland and Wolff. And people have lost out. The only way they can really assert their own democratic rights and agency now would probably be through a border poll. And this withdrawal agreement recognises the weakness of Britain's claim to sovereignty there. So that's one thing. So all of this level playing field stuff that's got everyone very excited has been taken out of the withdrawal agreement and put into the political declaration aimed at what the shape of the future free trade agreement with the EU will be. It's very telling about what the EU wants, but it shows the sort of like despondency and weakness of the Labour position, because what they're effectively saying is this gives Boris Johnson the right to create a Singapore on the coast of Europe. What it doesn't do that at all. It doesn't give Boris anything. It gives power to Parliament if they so wish to do that, but there's no appetite in the country to do that. The policies that Labour are putting forward are hugely popular in terms of nationalisation and everything else. So it equally gives power to Parliament, if there was a Labour government, to seriously take Corbyn's manifesto forward. So this speaks again to what we were starting out with at the beginning, the whole idea of agency in our own movement. This Labour Party, at this crucial moment, had the potential to do something very different, and instead falling back into despondency and saying, we don't have the power to do what we set out to do, and instead we're going to rely on someone somewhere else that we can't elect and we can't get rid of to protect workers. That's very weak as far as I can see it, particularly from a trade union
but
with decent rights for our members.
But at least, there are electoral realities. From the areas you've been in, how do you think the mood will feed through in a general election if it takes place in the next few months?
I think for me now, this is probably the most interesting thing about this the idea of a general election and what will happen, because I think, as Eddie said, what we're witnessing now is almost where the weaknesses of the parliamentary system, and I know a lot of people think that this is a strength of the parliamentary system, that it's debating backwards and forwards, but what it's actually doing to the rest of the country is opening it up and showing its weakness. And the weakness is that the parliamentary system is not fit to represent the whole of the country here in London. And so one of the things that is happening in the rest of the country is people are now engaging with that and seeing it, and they're not trusting MPs to just go off and represent them, because they're looking at the way that
and they'd be right not to.
Yeah. Well, they're looking at the way that MPs voted in the referendum, and then looking at the way that they voted, and they're saying, well, hang on a minute, we're not represented at all. And one of the things about Gloria De Piero, she did vote Remain, and she did this great big campaign in Ashfield to Remain, and Ashfield really did vote Brexit strongly, very strongly. And actually the people in Ashfield have not forgiven her for that, because they felt like she sold them out. So even though now she's trying to sort of back them, and she is,
Is she standing down at the next election?
She is standing down, and I'll be honest, I don't think that Labour will win that seat because there are a group of independents that are standing against her. Standing against Labour.
But this is the question, isn't it? One of the reasons why we know that Labour has not moved to the Liberal Democrat position, if you like, on Brexit, in spite of the fact that over 70% of Labour voters and supporters are pro-Remain or pro-European, is, as we keep on being told from the leader's office, the worry about alienating exactly the sort of people that you're talking about. Now, the big question is, A, is this compromised position still going to alienate them? And B, are they going to be alienated to the extent that Boris Johnson's strategy of winning the Bolsovers could actually work?
Well, what I'd say is the Labour position has, again, opened up those deep questions in those communities, in what they call the Labour heartlands, about whether or not the Labour Party actually represent them, and they have opened up those debates again.
And will they go to the Tories though, or will they?
There's going to be some areas, and I'll be honest, they will never vote for the Tories, and that is true. That is true. They will never vote. My dad would never vote for a Tory, not ever. And he probably will vote Labour in the next election, but he would do so very reluctantly. But there are lots of people that have not come from that tradition. My dad comes from that working class, trade union, NUM, striking minor tradition. So he will vote Labour.
A lot depends on whether Nigel Farage puts up Brexit Party candidates. I hear what you say about the Labour supporters who can't bring themselves to vote Tory. I think there's a lot of those in a lot of constituencies. Yes, that's right. If there were a Brexit candidate, they might vote for the Farage candidate, which obviously will affect the result.
Eddie, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the majority of people in this country are working people with much of the same interests. Many of the core Labour Party policies under Corbyn's manifesto are hugely popular. Nationalisation of certain industries, ending privatisation in others, stopping the outsourcing in councils and everywhere else. These are all very attractive policies, social housing and all that stuff. The problem is, the more Labour has gone down this rabbit hole with the, moving from the position where they were respecting the referendum to one where they're gung-ho now to have a second referendum and then put Remain back on the ballot paper again, has driven people away. And I think that's causing the drift. You've seen them plummet in the polls, and I think Lisa's right. There are people who will never vote Tory for the reason she stated, but there are plenty of people in working class communities who've had enough of Labour. And you've got to remember, this isn't something that's happened just because of the Brexit debate. We've had 40 years of neoliberal policies in this country, which have not just destroyed the industries in which those people worked, but with those industries going away, so did their trade unions, so did the institutions they had through which to express their political ideas about politics in the country at large. So I remember a couple of years ago, I was up at a Labour club in Wigan for a trade union meeting, and there's UKIP posters up in there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's inconceivable that might have happened at one time. So there's been a huge drift. You think of the millions of Labour voters that were gone from, Blair drove away. Yeah. That's why I was convinced Brexit would win.
We know about Blair driving people away. We also know he won 3 elections. So we have to bear that in mind.
The point I'm making, this isn't something that's just happened in this particular political moment. There's been a long-term drift between, or a wedge between the working class and a historic party. This current position on Remain is doing it no favours. Right. We need a general election, but they could be in serious trouble.
Well, what can I just say as well? So that you're right, trade unions went away, work went away, communities got devastated. But also what happened is their local MPs disappeared.
That's correct, yeah.
Because what happened through the Blair years, and we have to talk about these things because the hangover is still there. So what also happened is the Labour Party, at some point, because they wanted to change the direction they were going, they started parachuting in to their safest seats, which was the old Labour seats. They started parachuting in people like Peter Mandelson, like Tristan Hunt, like Miliband, both Milibands actually. One was in Sunderland and one's
South Shields.
Yeah, South Shields, and one's in Doncaster.
Ed Balls in Doncaster.
Yeah, and these are people. They started flying these in. Chris Leslie. In Nottingham East, which is where I lived for 25 years, in St Anne's, which is one of the poorest communities.
Yeah, but he took a marginal, didn't he, that had been Tory?
No, he didn't. Chris Leslie, no, not when he came to Nottingham. He got flown into Nottingham to one of the safest seats, 20,000 majority.
Yeah, but he previously taken
But he
a margin.
previously had.
Yeah.
Chris Leslie was described by a man called Charlie Whelan, who used to be Gordon Brown's spin doctor, as the bloke who used to do the photocopying in Gordon's office.
Yeah.
Well, I think he was actually described by Tony Blair as that, when he saw he'd been
Well,
elected.
Charlie claimed the credit for it, I think.
And what a great photocopier he must have been, because what he ended up doing is having a seat in Nottingham East for the last 10 years almost. And I'll be honest, I know that. I lived there for 22 years.
But it's interesting, though, some of the people you mentioned, some of these so-called Blairites, I mean, one thinks of Luciana Berger as well, Chris Leslie, they've left the Labour Party now. Friends would say they've been driven out, or they've either that or they've chosen to leave. And, of course, it's ironic what you're both saying about people leaving or deserting the Labour Party, given that the party's got its most left-wing leader, I think, probably ever. I mean, people used to think Michael Foot was left-wing, but compared with...
Well, that was my next question.
Compared with
My
Jeremy
next question
Corbyn
was whether the Islington lefties are any better fit for Labour voters. And let's be frank about it.
They're not.
Some of those people that have been put in by the trigger ballots and all that are clones of metropolitan lefties rather than traditional working class representatives.
They're doing it again. They are doing. The Labour Party has learned nothing. So they've learned nothing over the last 30 years, because they're doing exactly the same thing, but with their new type of Labour person, still not representing the people that they're supposed to be.
We've got a schizophrenic position in the Labour Party, I think. We have got a left-wing leader in Jeremy Corbyn, but what we haven't got is a left-wing PLP. What we haven't got is a working-class membership of the party. So we have got a more liberally minded membership generally, and we've got a set of policies that are hugely popular on the bread and butter issues, as I said, domestic issues on nationalisation, social housing and so on. But then we've got that being drowned in the absolute mire of the Remain shenanigans from that end of the party. And for those of us who, understand, you can't have both. You can't have a single market and competition laws and state aid and everything else and set about nationalising industries and everything else. And I don't think, people don't like being lied to. And if you've set out from a position of telling people in the country, all of them, we're going to respect the referendum result in 2017, to a position now where it's about as clear as mud what the position is. We're either going to negotiate a deal that we're then going to campaign against in favour of Remain, or, we're going to, it's all of this stuff. It becomes very confusing, that gets lost. But at the heart of it, really, without, it's got to be said, there's a class question here. Yeah. So I'm a recent joiner in the Labour Party, to be honest with you. And,
were you a member of another party before?
I was a member of the Communist Party once, a while ago. So I'm a recent member of the Labour Party, and I feel about as I feel about as at home as.
You're not welcome, Eddie. I'll be honest. You're not welcome.
In some parts of it, in some parts of it, there has to be said. But it is like they say, it is a mass organisation and all the rest of it. The problem is we have got a very middle class membership generally. It doesn't mean they're bad people, but it does mean the class interests do get drowned out in the bigger picture stuff.
I mean, 61.5 does the other, because I think the recent research by Tim Bale and others shows that actual party members of all parties are pretty similar, pretty middle class, and all the rest of it. So
they are. But I mean, one of the things that people don't like as well, and this is one of the really, for me, this really upset me actually, is the way that, and I'll be honest, it was Paul Mason. What he said is he was sort of giving advice to the Labour Party of where they should go with this sort of Brexit dilemma of whether or not you represent the Leavers or the Remainers or the old Labour or the whatever. And his advice to them was, we need to leave those people in Merthyr, in Hull, in Ashfield, in Mansfield. We need to leave those people now because actually, they're not the kind of people that we want in the party anyway. And what we need to do is focus on the metropolitan, the students, and ethnic minorities. And that's what Paul. And the thing is people out there are hearing that message and saying we are not welcome.
I think that's probably slight characterisation of what Paul Mason said. But his argument, I want to put this to you, his argument would be...
Well, which one? He's got lots. It depends which day of the week you
on
ask
this
him.
point, his argument would be that society is changing, that there has been deindustrialisation, that these communities have lost out. But on the other hand, there's a rising generation who weren't alive when the miners' strike took place, who are more urban, more metropolitan, care about other issues such as climate change and all the rest of it, and that therefore a party that's thinking about its future needs to be appealing to those more than, the traditional white deindustrialised working class.
Well, look, the majority of people...
I wasn't talking about just the white deindustrialised working class, because I was also talking about working class people. So I remember in one of his articles he'd written something about, the Pakistani taxi driver in Sheffield, that's who we should be focusing on. Absolutely not understanding those communities, that Pakistani taxi drivers would be living and sharing their lives with ex-miners and people that used to work in factories. He's actually, what it is this Westminster bubble, and they really do not understand what is happening. So this idea that there's some sort of move to the metropolitan... So these are people that are visible, absolutely, and making their voices heard. But actually, you go out just a few miles out of each city, and what you find is that most people are out there living their lives.
Yeah, but the majority of people live in the cities.
Well, they do, but that doesn't... Look,
no, they don't.
No, they do.
If you take my borough of London, for example, so... Whatever about this sort of like, I think it's a bit of an old Trotskyist thing, sort of hanging around the universities waiting. This next generation who sign up, this is going to be the revolutionary generation. I think there's a touch of that about Paul Mason. But if you go to the borough that I live in, there's 15,000 people waiting on the housing waiting list for social housing. There's still huge inequality. It's one of the poorest boroughs in the country.
Which one?
And it's one of the richest,
Islington. Oh, well, where Jeremy Corbyn's the MP.
You've got huge wealth right next to, huge poverty. I grew up in Deptford, it's much the same thing. You've got huge poverty in Deptford. You walk down the road over Creek Bridge to Greenwich, you've got huge wealth.
Okay. Can I just tell a funny story about it?
The majority of people are still earning less than 30 grand.
I once went to cover a meeting in Islington Labour Party where Richard Wilson, the one foot in the grave actor, was the guest speaker. And I have to say, it was the poshest Labour Party I've ever seen, because there was people... Margaret Hodge, who used to be leader of the council, was there, and they were all so middle class, this lot. The only other really posh Labour Party I went to once was I went to do a thing with Kate Hoey in Vauxhall, and it was a protest about the congestion charge, and there were all these ladies that came out of the posh squares in Kennington wearing their pearls. So you're right, there are plenty of middle class people in certain Labour Party constituencies, Islington and Vauxhall being a couple of examples.
Okay, I sort of put a pause on the class war for a moment, and I just want to end this section with this question. The message I'm getting is you're saying collectively, I think, yes, there ought to be a general election, but Labour's going to get hammered in it.
Yeah.
Well, I think the best outcome for me would to be get this Brexit bill through, get a general election, and we'd be in a better position there for Labour. If we go into a general election with Labour in a confused mix, Brexit's still the major issue, and Boris able to present himself as a voice of democracy in this country, we're in real trouble. But whatever way it goes, we need a general election because this Parliament is clearly unfit for purpose.
Lisa.
I agree with that. And I think what Boris Johnson is doing is playing a clever game here, because he realises that if Brexit is done, so if he gets it done like he wants to get it done, that perhaps his argument of Parliament versus the people would not be as strong. So I think he wants to go early, because his argument, which is going to play completely Parliament versus the people, and it's working. Let's be honest, it's working. So he's going to go early. I think the Labour Party, I'm not sure they even want an election. I'm not sure they know, what to say or where to go with this. So I think they're just sort of hanging on and hoping, that they can sort of make a difference on a day-to-day basis. Listen, I'm positive. I'm really positive because
your dad won't switch his vote.
No, I don't. Listen, I don't vote for Labour. I don't vote.
Why don't you vote?
I'm an anarchist.
Oh, right, okay. Mr. Bolton doesn't vote either. That's because he's a impartial political commentator.
Well, so am I then. But I hate all of them equally. But one of the things that I am positive about, really positive, so there is something really positive here, is that if none of them want an election, Labour don't want an election, Tories don't want an election, it's because they're scared. And why are they scared? Is because actually the public are starting to engage in politics. So actually I think that's something that is quite positive.
Well, they certainly are if they're sitting in the pub on a Saturday afternoon and not watching football or rugby, but they're watching the proceedings of the House of Commons.
And isn't that fantastic?
No, I mean, I am quietly positive. As I said, there are a lot more issues than just the whole Brexit thing. And people need change in this country. There's people languishing under the universal credit. There's a housing crisis. There's wages are stagnating and not going up. People out there are struggling, and I do think if we manage to clear up some of this stuff, there's hugely popular policies there that Labour could win. That could win support around.
Well, scrapping universal credit's one of them.
Yeah, which is brilliant. Actually.